John White shooed the gathered crowd away and returned to his cabin. They had lost good men today, and one was a raving lunatic who was spooking the people. There had always been tension among the people from the moment they stepped foot on the island, especially after finding the bleached bones strewn around. Human bones. As a show of confidence, he had agreed to leave his daughter Eleanor and granddaughter Virginia behind. The decision had torn at his soul, but it was necessary. Still, he was afraid. They had reached a tentative truce with the Algonquin Indians, but now one had been killed, and they would surely seek revenge. Yes, John White was scared. He would never admit it, but he felt in his bones that there was something terrifying on the island stalking his people. The presence could be felt if not seen. This was one of the reasons he wanted to get back to England, for reinforcements. He would be damned if they lost another colony. There was a knock on his cabin door. "Enter," he said. And when he looked up, it was his daughter standing there. "Come in, daughter," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. She wore a concerned expression on her face. Her infant daughter was in her arms. "Father, I have come to ask you to reconsider. Please, take us with you," she said. John White turned from her. He couldn't take them with him. It would send a terrible message to the rest of the settlers. Morale was already low, as was the food supply. Many wanted to quit the colony and return to England. This he had refused. He would take back only the few he needed, but the rest must remain, including his family. "Eleanor," he said, "you must remain. The people won't trust that they are safe if I won't even trust my own family to the island." "Father, I beseech you." White held up his hand. The decision had been made. The baby started to cry, and he wanted to join it. 2 weeks before leaving for England, John White had requested a meeting with Mateo, the Algonquin chief. He was escorted to Mateo's camp, and to his surprise, the Indian chief was very welcoming to him. John apologized for the death of the Indian, but Mateo brushed him off. Apparently, the chief did not hold the settlers responsible for what had happened. In fact, Mateo sent White back to the settlement with some provisions and a smile. Settlers had been on high alert, expecting the Algonquins to attack, but nothing happened. A week passed and routines returned to normal. It was under these lax conditions that Henry White attempted his escape. They had regulated him to the lodgings with a guard on duty every night, but after 3 days on house arrest, the very observant Henry had noted that the alcoholic guard would pass out drunk by midnight from self-made hooch. One night, as soon as midnight struck, Henry had broke the glass from the window and shimmied out onto the porch. He glanced up at the unconscious guard. Stealthily, he freed the guard of his weapon, a long, gleaming dagger, and ran for it. He low-crawled to the front of the stockade and attacked the 2 guards before slipping through. Then he headed for the beach. Moonlight guided his way through the tangles that were the woodlands. The forest floor was crawling with multi-legged creatures milling about in search of continued survival. His bare feet stomped the foliage beneath him. The trees rattled overhead, and startled birds took flight. Was something following him? Henry paused, leaning against the bark of an ancient tree. His chest convulsed as he attempted to catch his breath. Ears like radar, searching for sound, but he could only hear himself and the internal fear permeating throughout his being. His skin exhaled sweat, providing the slick for all nature's crimes attached to. He darted from tree to tree, from one to the next, and listened. Nothing. Recharged, he sprinted forth. Something screeched in the distance, but he did not stop. He ran until his lungs burned, and then, finally, he heard the sound of the welcoming ocean. A wave of hope nudged him through the thick sand. The waiting canoe was his reward, and he heaved against its resistance, pulling him towards the water. The waves kissed its wooden bottom. Henry clenched his teeth against the screaming swell in his throat. The canoe was in the water now, and he rowed, pushing himself away from the strange woman. He looked in the air to make sure there weren't any more bodies falling like breathing raindrops. But it was just him and her. Then it happened. The momentum of the canoe stopped. And although he paddled furiously, he went nowhere. The canoe was quickly taking on water. Down, down, down. The hole in the bottom of the boat belched water inside. Cold wetness seeped into Henry's trousers. The ocean toyed with him, slowly pulling the boat from beneath him until he was treading water. And there she was, standing on the shore, waiting with a sly smile. Gone were the boots and the trousers. Only the red soldier's coat remained to hide her plentiful physical assets. She was amused by his predicament. He could tread water until exhaustion delivered him to a watery grave, or he could take his chances with her on the beach. Flashbacks of powerfully built black man lifting a grown man off his feet and ripping his neck open with his bad teeth. Henry shivered, both from the cold and fear. His arms and legs felt like anvils, pulling him down. But survival instincts overtook him, and he dog-pedaled back to the beach. He crawled onto the sand, coughing up water. His heart thumped in his chest. And when he looked up, she was waiting for him there. Terror, the realization that something supernatural was occurring right before his eyes. The smile had disappeared from her lips. The amusement in her eyes replaced by a frostiness akin to hate. "Get on your feet," she said in a soft, lifting voice. Despite the softness of the command, there was forcefulness to it, and it demanded obedience. Henry struggled to his feet as she had said. She was beautiful. There was no denying that. Her skin was like living porcelain. Her emerald eyes were clear and reflected intelligence. She looked at him the way a spectator would an animal in a zoo. Henry jerked away from her hand as she reached towards his face. Unperturbed, she reached out again. Her long, yellow-stained nails traced his lips. She was doing something to him with those eyes. He could not look away. Numbness started at his lips where her nails grazed. His body became heavy, and suddenly all he wanted to do was close his eyes and fall into the sand. "What is your name?" she said breathily. "Henry," he whispered. "Down, Henry. Down, Henry." And he went down to his knees. With her toes against his forehead, she nudged him over onto his back and straddled him. Henry tried to speak, but he could not. Henry tried to protest, but he could not. He felt heavily intoxicated. And then there was a stinging prick at the base of his neck, and then darkness. Don't be out when the moon comes up. Don't be out.
Blatant TV.